tell you, I am very happy to be here because I did not think I was going to make it. But here we are. And I'm very thankful to Paratiso for letting me come to talk about what my passion is, which is books, as you can well imagine. Uh, Today, when one goes for an interview, one of the standard questions that you get is, what's the latest book you've read? Well, if you're applying to be an agronomist, that does sound like an unusual question. If the answer is, oh, well, a technical book, or, well, I haven't read in a while, or, gee, I forgot the name, or whatever, that's not very good. What they're looking for there, they want somebody who knows the technical part. They want somebody who speaks English. Everybody wants that now. But they want, maybe more than anything else, somebody who's interesting. And that comes from reading books. Professor Ludwig Wittgenstein, who taught at Cambridge University, he was a philosopher and a studier of language, said the limits of my language are the limits of my mind. All I know is what I have words for. You get those words from reading books. The other day I was talking with a high school student and asked him, of course, so I'll ask everybody, what's the latest book that you've read? Because I'm always looking for new titles and interesting books. And he said, well, I don't really read books at all. I don't like it, so I don't read them. Oh, just as if it were something like spinach. And I don't like spinach, so I don't eat it. I looked at him for a minute and I said, well, do you want to go to university? And he said, oh, yes, I want to go either to England or the States or to Australia. Okay, well, you better change your mind about books then, because you have to have more information and you have to have a bigger vocabulary. And that's what you get from reading books. Now, I know that Paratiso has invited me to talk to English teachers, but I would like to change that. And I'd like for you to take off your English teaching skin and put on the other skin that's underneath. The skin that's a mother or a father or a sister or a brother or aunt and uncle. And think about your life and your reading. What are the books that have made a difference for you? And if you could put those in the chat, that would be very helpful for me, because I'm always looking for new books. Or let us know what books you think we should have that you'll want to find in the bookstore. The enjoyment of learning and the enjoyment of reading is a skill, and it begins very, very early in life. When you're in the arms of a parent and you feel the love and you look at the book and it's fun and it's a good occasion. And so that love of learning and love of the books and talking with your parents, it all goes together in the same package. The first thing that a child really has control over that's his are the books in his room. And he can spend his time reading the books and organizing his own life. Later, he learns how to sit on a swing and make it go by itself, but with leg power. And then he learns to ride a bike, and then he's really off. But learning begins in the lap of an adult, and it begins with books. Now, there are many techniques to reading a book, and a few here. If you could put in the chat for us more that you have learned or that you have used with teaching of children, we'd like to have all those ideas. Prepare the child for the story by discussing what might be coming. Explain any difficult words beforehand. Make it fun. Use various voices for the characters. Make reading of the story a family event, not a school task. Ask the child to retell the story to someone in the family. Now, the retelling of a story or the retelling of a movie is actually very difficult, and you can try it yourself. It's to begin at the beginning and end up at the end is hard, and it's particularly hard for a child. I can see you all practicing that tonight. Uh, learning a language is a lifetime event, and it takes a lifetime to do it. The bookstore has a commitment to lifelong learning, uh, which is why we have two bookstores. It would be a lot easier for us, and we would make more money if we just used our warehouse and sent books from there and didn't have a bookstore. But we feel philosophically that one needs to, if they've learned a language or whatever they're doing, they need to have a bookstore where they can go and the books will be there for them. Now, this is a time of great stress, which we are all feeling. But for children, it's a time of more stress, I think. They have their problems and they magnify their problems. And there are various books that can deal with that and can show them maybe they're not the only one who has a problem. Maybe a book can be a solution. I want to show you some of the books that the libraries of the language institutes have asked us for. And there's bilingual schools that read original books. And these are some of the ones that they use as class sets. What Do You Do with a Problem? By Kobe Yamada. One day, I had a problem. I did not want it. I did not ask for it. I really didn't like having a problem, but it was there. The boy tried to make the problem go away, and he worried, and it consumed his thoughts until he finally decided worrying was making the problem bigger than it actually was. This had to stop. He took a good look at the problem and decided that maybe something beautiful was inside. His problem became an opportunity to be brave and do something new. Every problem has an opportunity for something good. You just have to look for it. Moo by Sharon Creech. Rena's parents were journalists in New York City. And when their newspaper closed down and they lost their jobs, they both lost their jobs. That sounds sort of familiar today, doesn't it? As the family is in the car taking her father to an interview, the mother turns to the father and says, do you really like being a journalist? And he says, well, not really. And she said, well, let's just change. Let's move someplace else and do something different. That is the beginning of a new adventure and a new life for everyone, from New York City with its noise and chaos to farm life in Maine. Now, life changes for little boys, particularly from the ages of 7 to 10, when they discover the Dog Man series. Dog Man. There are many, many books in this series. I think little girls like them too. I must say, I like the book. Uh, this is the story of a dog that is very intelligent and a policeman who is very dumb. Well, the two of them end up in an explosion together and their heads come off. And the doctors decide that the best thing would be to put the head of the dog on the policeman. So that's the beginning of Dogman. Everybody out except Dogman. You are in big trouble. Psst. Hey, Chief, the mayor's here. Oh, send her in. Wham. uh, Howdy, Mayor. Don't you howdy me. Have you seen today's news? Chief is soft on crime. Petey escapes from cat jail 8 times. Latest poll, everybody hates Chief. You are in big trouble, Chief. You better straighten up or I'll replace you with a robot. Slam. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Now, come on. That you have to realize a child can spend many happy hours and he can't say he's bored. Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. This is the story of a young girl who grew up in her grandfather's arms looking at books. And she just loved books and could hardly wait to get to first grade, where she knew she would be taught to read. Well, she finally got to first grade, and all of the books and the letters she looked at, and the other children were learning to read, and they just, the letters didn't make any sense to her. They were all squiggly and wiggly. So the only thing that she could imagine was happening was that she was just dumb and she would never learn to read. And this went on for several years. She tried to hide it, but eventually she got into Mr. Falker's class. And Mr. Falker knew about dyslexia. And he began to teach her in his special way. And she grew up and she became a writer. And she is Patricia Polacco, the author of this book. 6 Dots, a story of young Louis Braille by Jan Bryant. Louis Braille opened the world of books for blind people. When I was older, I went to school with the other village children all day as they wrote down words and numbers or read out loud from printed pages. I sat in the front row, listening and memorizing. Do you have books for blind children? I asked again. Oh no, Louis, the teacher replied. I'm sorry, but I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I just wanted to read and to write on my own like everyone else. You can read more and find out how he did it. Now, the world for 10 to 14-year-olds really opens up because there's a lot more words and more complex concepts. Wonder is a rare gem of a novel, beautifully written, about a 10-year-old boy who has facial anomalies. It's about courage, friendship, understanding, and the freedom to be oneself. Now, the author that I'm sure you're all familiar with is Roald Dahl. And his books are wonderful, from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And these 3 are 3 that I really enjoy. The Witches, George's Marvelous Medicine, and Matilda. The vocabulary in Roald Dahl books is wonderful. Very few concessions are made to children. The children have to come up to words and vocabulary that they need to know. Now, of all of this, I have to say that about my favorite is Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter is a book where a twist of fate gives a boy magical powers. At the bookstore, we have tremendous problem with Harry Potter when they were coming out. There's 7 books in the series. And each time a new book came out, there was a great deal of fanfare and advertising all over the world. It was a big event, and children would line up to get the books. Our problem in Paraguay is that the books only came out in Spanish 6 months after the books came out in English, and all of the fanfare was for the English book. And we had a very wonderful, loyal little client that came in, and he said that he was taking English, but that he didn't know very much yet. But could he please just see the book? So we gave him the book, and he sat down, and he looked at it, and he looked at those words, and finally he shook his head, and he said, "Nope, I just can't understand it. I'll have to wait." So he came back in 6 months. Please, all of you, teach faster. We definitely see that children who speak the 2 languages and can read in English and in Spanish almost always choose to read in English. And I don't know why. I think maybe the books are more fun. Today, we hopefully have Kindles or tablets or computers or smartphones where we can read books. That can work fairly well for an adult, but children like to see how far they've read, and they like to feel the pride of finishing a real paper book. A young person can read a book without having to ask his parent for the tablet, or for having to ask for more time to read on the tablet, or to ask for money to get more time to read on the telephone. A book is in his power. Attention spans are short, and distractions are impossible to avoid. We know that, but we go on the computer and we go from one thing, and then all of a sudden we're off 10 other places, and we forgot what we began to read. For children, it's even worse on a tablet or on a computer. Sorry, don't know what's happening here. Nothing's happening.
Nuevo dispositivo de conocimiento bioóptico organizado, de nombre comercial BOOK. BOOK es una revolucionaria ruptura tecnológica, sin cables, sin circuitos eléctricos, sin batería, sin necesidad de conexión. BOOK nunca se cuelga. BOOK nunca necesita ser... Hola. Presentamos el nuevo dispositivo de conocimiento bioóptico organizado, de nombre comercial BOOK. BOOK es una revolucionaria ruptura tecnológica, sin cables, sin circuitos eléctricos, sin batería, sin necesidad de conexión. BOOK nunca se cuelga. BOOK nunca necesita ser reiniciado. Simplemente tienes que abrirlo y comenzar a disfrutar de sus enormes ventajas. Así es como funciona. BOOK está construido con hojas de papel numeradas secuencialmente. cada una de las cuales es capaz de almacenar miles de bits de información. Cada página es escaneada ópticamente, registrando la información directamente a tu cerebro. Una simple sacudida de dedo nos lleva a la siguiente página.
I cannot live without books. Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826. That's pretty much how I feel also. Now I'd like to pass you over to Marisol Recoder, who leads our book clubs. I hope you all will join. It's once a month. And she also leads the discussions with Paraguayan authors that we have once a month. And she also orders most of the books in the bookstore, and will take advice from you after this session. So, Marisol.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you all for joining. Many of you probably know me from the bookstore. I've been working there most of my life, so it kind of feels like this is a joke that I keep saying. I'm kind of part of the inventory now. I like to start by saying that I really respect your profession. I mean, teach and motivate students must be one of the most challenging yet noble careers of the world. Thank you so much for doing that. Once I read a sign that said, if you can read this, thank a teacher. So thank you. I think we all appreciate your work. As many of you probably know, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not here to tell you how to dictate classes, but I've been a student my whole life and I love books. So I just like to talk to you about something I truly believe could improve the lives of your students, and I believe it can lead to develop some qualities that are important for life, as it can help your students to improve the way they express their ideas, or maybe help them analyze logical structure of texts and improve their comprehension ability. While I was growing up, I was sort of like a book freak. I used to spend countless hours in my bedroom reading books. My father used to knock on the door from time to time just to check if I was still alive, since I wasn't showing any teenage typical behavior. But for me, it was so much fun to imagine the different endings to the stories I was reading, or to imagine what would I do if I was one of the characters, or how would I act, or what would I done in a situation. So I always think that my life is so much interesting inside my head than in actual real life. But what I wanted to tell you is that I realize now that how I spend those hours helped me develop this ability to think more clearly and rationally about everyday matters, and also to be more aware of what to believe in. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about implementing a reading approach into your classes, specifically for those who teach teenagers. The question that we usually get at the bookstore is, how can I get my students to read in English when they don't even read in their own language? Motivating a teenager can be hard, especially if you're about to ask them to do an activity that requires them to stay still, sit still, and be focused on doing something that, let's be honest, most of them find boring. But what I like to suggest is something that we're implementing at the bookstore and it's working quite good. Where the idea we came up with was to think of reading as a social activity. We wanted to encourage people to start reading more. So what we did was we created this book club to generate expectation and to create deeper engagement with stories. It would be such a cool thing if you could create a virtual book club between your students, And if you let me say this, I would have loved to have something like this while I was growing up. Well, my personal advice from what I've learned at our own book club is not to ask them so much about the specifics of the book, but to focus on their opinions on the subjects or events that took place in the test, like personality of the characters, maybe the actions that happen. You can ask them to take a side on a specific matter and to defend their position in this subject and why. And this is a great way not only to get them reading, but also to foster critical thinking skills. And it's also very important to remark that in this activity, you will also get your students talking. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. Let me give you some hints on what do I do while preparing our book club. The first thing to do is to begin with the story. You should find, or you could find interesting reading material. In your case, it will have to be a book that appeals to teens. If the teenager is not used to read, we have to find a way to make them interested in what they're about to start reading. A good idea might be to tell them the story of the book in a fun and exciting way, trying to fit the book into their interests so it can be seen as a rewarding activity, something they will enjoy. You can start by showing them a clip of the movie version or maybe a clip that shows a similar story to create expectation. That will make them want to know more about the story. Some tips. The hardest part, I think, is to choose the book. Once you've chosen the book, it's just water down the hill. I always prepare discussion questions. This is an easy thing to do. And you can even look up for extra questions on the internet as a way to complement yours. There's a lot of resources online, so that's not a hard thing to do. A practical thing to do can also be divide the whole book club activity into chapters. That way you can create expectation about what's coming next. We weren't able to do this activity in the bookstore. I mean, we read the whole book, but that could be a good idea also. Or maybe if you have too many students in one class, it can be a good idea to also to separate them into groups of 6 to 10 students, so they can all have a chance to present their opinions and to talk and to say what they think about the subject. I believe that something that helps a lot is when we create a debate between the students to make them expose their own ideas on the subject. It would be so great that you can also use this activity as a way to connect with your students in a more relaxed environment. I think you can do that. It's easy. Let them interact with each other. You can use the first 10 minutes maybe of the meeting to hang out and to ask them what they've been up to or how are they feeling these days. I mean, even though the connection may be virtual, it can still be meaningful, and you can give your students a sense of normality and security in these times of uncertainty that we're living in. I mean, they've been through a lot this year. All of us did, but especially them. The most important thing, I think, is to try to keep it as an easygoing and fun activity, and I'm sure they'll end up thanking you. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about reading options. Nowadays, there are different choices to cope with every student's levels of English. Some choices that are suitable for students who are still learning the language and are not ready yet to read unabridged books. For those students, there's a line of books that are called graded readers. I'm not inventing the wheel here. You probably heard of these types of books like millions of times. But, well, those graded readers are an amazing complement since there are short versions of the books that have been adapted to different levels. And a good thing is that you can also choose from different types of genres and different, whatever suits your students' needs better. This is good to keep them motivated. And well, My favorites here would be probably classics, human interest, and word stories, probably. Well, now let's go to my favorite part. Let's talk about books. I'd like to show you some ideas of books that you could use with your students. Hachiko. Hachiko was, probably many of you heard about this beautiful story. He was a Japanese dog that remembered for his remarkable loyalty to his owner, for whom he continued to wait for over 9 years at the train station after the man's death. I know it's kind of a sad story. I cried. But there's a lot of subjects that you can approach here. Like, for example, loyalty. Loyalty is often viewed as an asset in decline, especially nowadays. It can be healthy to discuss and question loyalty and ask your students how do they feel about this value. Another thing is hope. It's a great idea to ask them whether they're finding it hard or easy to stay positive regarding the situations that they're living as teenagers, or maybe the situations that we're living right now in our current way of life. Patience, the importance of being patient in all aspects of life, and I think this is something that they're going to find it useful even in the older years. And something that this is some favorite part of me is like speaking of traditional culture of another country. Let's talk about a little bit about culture in different places of the world, just to make them sure that make them know that there's more to their own culture and reality. Stranger at Green No. Well, the picture on the right is one of my favorites here. This is how we should see animals. I don't know if you think that, but I do. Well, this is a story of human interest, the story of Hano. And it's a big black gorilla who once lived in the forest, and now he lives in a zoo cage. And it's so sad for me to see this wonderful wild animal that has to be behind the bars of a cage. But this leads to great themes of discussion, which could be, for example, the ethics in keeping animals captive. You could ask them opinions on zoos and places like SeaWorld or others that keep animals locked to present shows to the public and make a profit out of it. The empathy we should feel for cage animals. Ask them, for example, how would they feel if they have to be the ones who had to be caged in a cage for 24/7. But maybe this is something that they can all relate now, all of us, with this whole lockdown situation. But I think it would be surprising and interesting to know their opinions on what's going on currently. The monkey's paw. I really like this one. This is a supernatural short story first published in 1902. In the story, 3 wishes are granted to the owner of the monkey's paw, but the wishes come with an enormous price for interfering with fate. Some ideas to approach with this reading are, for example, greed. The monkey's paw is a symbol of desire and greed, everything that its owner could possibly wish for, and the unrestricted ability to make it happen. But the story reminds us that unintended consequences often accompany the best intentions. This could make such an interesting debate. You could also reflect on this quote: be careful what you wish for, you may receive it. I find that really spooky. And you could also ask him about morality. What's the moral lesson of the story? Jane Eyre. Oh, Jane Eyre is probably one of the greatest classic novels. And there's a lot of subjects of discussion here. Jane Eyre could be considered as a feminist novel, and that's like a really up-to-date topic right now. Jane Eyre is a strong character in a Victorian society, and she managed to keep up her will against all odds, and that, I think, shows a lot of courage in a woman ahead of her time. I'm kind of a big fan of her. A good idea could be to introduce into your discussion the concept of resilience. Um, you could create a debate on what they think that word means and how important it is to incorporate that concept into our everyday lives. Another, Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I love this quote. And this is the story of an extraordinary man who changed American history in his short life. Through his activism and inspirational speeches, he played an essential role in ending the legal segregation of African American citizens in the United States. I mean, this book can lead you to so many interesting subjects that can help you foster those critical thinking skills that we need so much amongst youth these days. For example, you can talk about racism. You can ask your students their opinions on the matter. You can talk about this movement that came after George Floyd's death, Black Lives Matter. This is a recent thing. They probably heard of it. You can use this book to give them a little context on history. You can talk about slavery in the United States, how people from the country fought a civil war because of this. It could be a great thing to talk about pursuing your dreams, even if they seem so hard to accomplish, or even discuss about doing what's right, even if it's not easy. Well, now, while graded readers are a wonderful way of getting your students to read in English, when they reach higher levels, it can be a good idea to encourage your students to read novels which have not been adapted for language learners. Let me show you some ideas, and some of these books are my personal favorite, so I apologize ahead of if I get carried away with my enthusiasm. Animal Farm. This is one of my favorite personal books. Animal Farm is the most thought-provoking piece of literature ever. The book tells you the story of a group of animals who rebel against their human farmer, hoping to create a society where animals can be equal, free, and happy. Well, ultimately, and I don't want to be a spoiler here, but the rebellion is betrayed and the farm ends up in a state as bad as it was before. Oh, the subjects you could discuss with this book. You can brainstorm the word revolution, what it means to them. You can discuss the causes and effects of the various revolutions that have taken place throughout history. You can discuss the role of propaganda. How is language and propaganda used to influence and manipulate people? Or you can ask them if they feel influenced by advertising or social media. How does that affect their lives? You can deepen social matters. For example, how does ignorance lead to social and political oppression? A great question, I think, would be what happens when power is taken advantage of? It's something we should really think about. And it's a great thing. Plus, we would be helping them question their own country reality in a way. Another favorite of mine is The Giver. The Giver is set in a society that fears appear to be utopian, but as the novel progresses, it's revealed to be a dystopia. I love dystopias. I have to tell. The main character is a young boy named Jonas. He believes that he's living in an ideal world until he's given his life assignment as the receiver of memory. And then he begins to understand the dark secrets behind his community. There's even a movie version of this book. I haven't seen it. I can say if it's good or bad, but I read the book and I completely loved it. And I'm sure your students will too. This book provides you with so many opportunities to foster the text-to-word connections. How would they feel if their government was imposing them their career paths? You can start by that. What would they do if they weren't available to choose for themselves? Another good thing to ask them would be, how does ignorance of history makes us more vulnerable to manipulation? The general knowledge of history allows people to be able to learn from mistakes and avoid making those same mistakes again in the future. This is why it's so important to keep track of memories. A great idea also to discuss is that in Jonah's community, the members are sheltered from feeling any physical or emotional pain. And even if that sounds great, it also keeps them from appreciating positive emotions, for example. So you can ask them that. The book thief. I read in the chat that someone put the book thief. So, well, this is a story that takes place within the World War II. Personally, I had the chance to read a lot about this subject, and I find it fascinating. You can use this novel to show your students the importance and benefits of reading. You can also discuss love and hate in human nature, as we see in the book Acts of Genuine Kindness of people hiding Jews from the Nazi regime. It would also be a great moment for them to learn or reinforce their knowledge of the Holocaust. I think it would be a great exercise to read this book and to debate about this book. Well, as a way to summarize a lot that I've been saying, I think reading is important because it develops our thoughts, it gives us endless knowledge, and it's a great way to keeping our minds active. Reading books can help us learn, understand, and makes us smarter. This is really important. Not to mention the knowledge, the vocabulary expansion, thinking skills we develop. So please read a good book today and encourage your students to do it too. Thank you very much. And I get back to Diane now.
Once again, I'd just like to say thank you. The logo of the bookstore, as you can see, Educar para Transformar. We are an educational institution, really.